I was going to talk a little bit about some of the narrative frameworks and some of the issues involved in the explanatory frameworks. And I guess I've been a little bit reluctant to comment on the whole Russia-Ukraine war situation over the last year or two on the channel, really since maybe early 2023. And I feel it was, the domestic situation, or political situation around the Russia-Ukraine war has been a little bit difficult, and I didn't want to get myself into trouble, didn't want to get myself on certain lists maintained by certain people in Ukraine. I feel now it's perhaps a good time to start to comment. Of course, it's almost the third anniversary of the war, and over all that time, I have been trying to sort of think through the analysis of this very, very major event that's going on in our world and what it all means about the rebalancing of power in the world, the rebalancing of cultural perspectives in the world, the geopolitics of it all, but also the what we learn about history from it, what we learn about how good and bad history can lead to good or bad political decisions, good or bad responses from the public. I was genuinely shocked in some ways about the way in which people, the broad public as well as the media, etc., responded to the outbreak of the war, in the latest phase of the war in Ukraine. It has been a really interesting thing about the way in which people bring big assumptions about narratives about world history, the post-1945 world, the Atlantic Alliance, freedom and democracy versus autocracy, all these kind of big narrative ideas to their sort of reaction to events, both emotional reaction as well as conceptual reaction, political reactions, but also the way in which it's played out socially for people. I think that's been one of the horrible things about some of the way in which people have been mistreated because of their beliefs about a war that no one really wanted to happen. Well, many of the people who were involved didn't really want to happen, and that is, as all wars do, it involves enormous amounts of tragedy. But there has been a bit of a freak out in the EU and a range of different responses. I've noticed Michael McFaul was over at the Munich Security Conference, and he described J.D. Vance's comments and the potential backing out of the US from the Ukraine war as the biggest crisis of transatlantic relations in his lifetime. I've referred to Anne Applebaum, who appears to have judiciously taken out Polish citizenship just in time to be the US foreign policy minister in exile in Warsaw. And there was also a very interesting comment from the Jean-Philippe Tanguy, who is the French Rassemblement National, not Jean-Marie Le Pen, Marie Le Pen's political party in France, commenting that although he had some sympathies with some of the particular positions that J.D. Vance was talking about, he abhorred J.D. Vance's intervention with his speech because it was, clumsy, hillbilly, harangue, inept intervention in the domestic affairs of Europe. But there's also been a really interesting article by Patrick Armstrong saying Europe gets an anatomy lesson, which is sort of saying, well, there has been this long-standing conflict between EU and the United States. And, famously, well, he begins the article by quoting Victoria Newland's famous comment from the leaked phone call about the Ukraine Maidan coup in 2014, about, an anatomy lesson for the European Union. I'm sure viewers may well know what I'm referring to, but do check those comments out if you get a chance. It's really important in this context, and I think Jacques Bode has just done a brilliant discussion with Nima over at Dialogue Works, where he points out that Ukraine was an aggressor in this war. Began in 2014 and also in 2021. The Ukraine government declared it wanted to take back Crimea and began to assemble forces to attack the Donbass. And I think the other thing to bear in mind in terms of the narrative is the US party as a war. There was a fascinating exchange with Keith Kellogg and a journalist. I'm not sure who it was. I assume it was a journalist, some sort of panel host at the Munich Security Conference where Kellogg was fumbling around talking about diplomacy and why would the EU or Ukraine be involved, and the journalist basically asked, so who is the perpetrator and who is the intermediary? The US is not just an intermediary in this event. It is a party to the war, and as Emmanuel Todd has been saying, it is a party that has endured a strategic defeat, and this is really critical to things. But I just want to re-emphasize my point earlier on that this is about more than just the termination of the Ukraine conflict. This is the very tentative, very fragile beginning of not even the termination phase, but the opening of the vista of a termination phase, of the end to the very long-standing, war, if you like, conflict, if you like, strategic competition, if you like, between the United States or the Anglo-Americans and Russia. Before that, the Soviet Union, and before that, Russia. And also it is part of the remaking of the world order. It's part of the breakdown of the post-1945 world, the sort of response of the world to the breakdown of US primacy. Of course, over at my Substack, let me just give everyone a thing there, jeffrich.substack.com, where you can learn from history and live in tune with a changing world. I do a weekly history book recommendation. I'm going through the United States at the moment. We'll be looking at 4 other major powers around the world: China, India, Europe, and Russia over 2025. And I also do deep dives every Wednesday. And what's more, if you become a paid subscriber, that's where you get the deep dives, all the deep dives, as well as the preview. And you can also get access to my 30-page guide to the post-1945 world, based on the brilliant work by John Darwin, Rise and Fall of Global Empires, whose history I've been using as the basis for my series of videos on the rise and fall of global empires. And I think this is the key thing that we're sort of seeing. We're seeing the breakdown of the post-1945 world and the re-establishment of diplomatic, economic, security, cultural institutions and processes to sort of bind together in a reasonable web of exchange and contact the new powers and the new cultures of the newly constituted world, the post-2024 world, or perhaps the post-2025 world. 80 years after the kind of not fully resolved World War II, never really a proper peace agreement in Europe, never truly a proper peace agreement in East Asia and the West Pacific. we're seeing all the parties involved asserting the need for a better arrangement. Now, this is often expressed in the terms of a collective security agreement, the need for a collective security agreement in Europe. That was one of the key proposals that Russia made in 2021. It proposed the broad heads of a security agreement between a post-Cold War, post-1945 security agreement in Europe that would ensure peace and development in the European peninsula of Eurasia. And I think this is one of the key outcomes that we're working to. It's one of the key things a lot of people have pointed to, but I think what a lot of people are also missing is that when we're talking about the breakdown of the post-1945 world order, the post-1945 American-led world order, the breakdown of NATO, we're also talking about not just the security arrangements in Europe, we're talking about the collective security arrangements across the entirety of Eurasia. And one of the key things I kind of focus on in that post-1945 World History Guide, and which is critical to the assessment by John Darwin in his history, is he talks about the partition of Eurasia. At the end of World War II, relatively rapidly, within 5 years, absolutely unique historical situation emerges, which is that an unprecedented historical situation emerges, which is that an external power, the United States, entrenches itself militarily, politically, socially. It literally occupies Japan. It literally occupies Germany and imposes constitutions on them and establishes military bases. But it establishes itself at both ends of Eurasia, in Europe and in East Asia and the West Pacific. And these, as well, I guess, you could also add in West Asia, the whole Israel-Palestine issue, the management of Iran and Iraq and the Gulf states, etc. And also, as the British Empire disintegrates and the Suez Canal crisis and all these sorts of things, as well as, I guess, the partition that was established in South Asia, tragically so, as the British Empire withdrew from India in 1947. And, these issues remain with us today. Taiwan, Korea, India and Pakistan, the Middle East, the conflict between Israel and Palestine and all the associated conflicts, and of course the lingering problem of the border of security in Europe. It's moved from Berlin progressively eastward to end up now, like potentially, if America and Europe had its way, at Kursk province of Russia, at near Rostov-on-Don, rather than Kiev or Lviv or somewhere more sensible, right on the doorstep of Russia. I think when we talk about collective security, I think this is something people need to bear in mind, that it's not just Europe, it's actually Eurasia. And the historically unprecedented situation of America establishing itself on both ends of Eurasia, seeming to have, be almost about to achieve, Mackinder's dream of controlling the world island, and hence controlling the world, if only those damn Soviets weren't in the way, or China, or America hadn't lost China. This is an utterly unprecedented historical situation. And when Americans talk about the US-led based world order, I think it's really important to remember that there is a hard physical, a brutal fact, as John Mearsheimer says. He doesn't often actually refer to this brutal fact, but the American-led world order, post-1945 world order, relies upon this utterly unprecedented and also utterly unsustainable situation where the United States has military bases, has 100 times more military bases than any other country in the world, and they're all over the world, and that they have effectively extraterritorial rights over European nations, Japan, Taiwan, all that sort of thing. So that they have this partition of Eurasia entrenched. By opening up the question of collective security in Europe, you are also opening up the question of the collective security of Eurasia as a whole. And this was formally recognised, I think, by President Xi and Putin after their meeting last year in Beijing, where there was an acknowledgement or statement, I think, that they wanted to begin a process of establishing collective security in Eurasia without external parties. That historically unprecedented situation that was established by military force, including the use of weapons of mass destruction in Japan, of having an external power dominating, providing a security umbrella to the entirety of Eurasia, is utterly unsustainable and also just no longer necessary in a world of more evenly distributed power, a world in which resources, wealth, power, cultural dynamism is coming as much from China, India, Russia, Iran, West Asian countries, the whole world. It's not all driven by the West. And I think that is the really big, long-term, slow historical process that this meeting in Riyadh is a very, very first step towards, and that is likely to, probably take maybe, 10, 20, maybe 50 years. You could even compare, I think, the slow, let's say the slow withdrawal of the United States from Eurasia as equivalent, I guess, almost to the process of decolonisation that happened after 1945. That took, it was still going in the mid-1970s. In some ways, it is still going. I mean, it was only last year that France was really kicked out of some of its major possessions or crypto colonies in Africa. It still has a colony in New Caledonia, and Britain still has all sorts of weird possessions all over the world, as indeed does the United States. So the process of decolonisation was long, difficult, slow, and had many twists and turns. I think we are given the unsustainability of the partition of Eurasia, in a way at the start of a similar process. When people talk about Donald Trump retrenching the American empire and focusing on the American homeland, and isn't it a good thing that, he's sort of, buying off Greenland and, seizing Canada and the Panama Canal. These are the sort of erratic, fitful reactions at a very early stage, I think, to the American leadership group, leadership class, very divided leadership class, coming to terms with the big historical process that is underway, which is ultimately this partition of Eurasia is unsustainable, has to end. America has to let go and become a country like every other country that sort of acts sort of within its borders, can still be a kind of a world state, exercise significant influence, but not do it on the basis of extraterritorial rights and military bases all around the world. Not do it on the basis of hillbilly harangues by J.D. Vance against a country or a set of countries that deserve a hell of a lot more respect than they were provided in the Munich Security Dialogue. I guess one's only consolation is, J.D. Vance's capabilities were somewhat exposed in that speech. I guess the key message I would add is there are some hopeful signs, but don't get overexcited. Don't overrate them. I think we are at the early steps of confidence-building measures in diplomacy between of what could be quite a long process of terminating the Ukraine conflict, but also terminating those at least two other conflicts around American primacy or Eurasian partition and the long-standing Russia or Anglo-American conflict with Russia. It's a very positive thing that is the case, but there are a lot of difficult issues to be resolved yet. And I don't have an awful lot of faith in Donald Trump's capabilities. A little bit more positive about Marco Rubio's capabilities after the last couple of days, but still there's a lot of confidence building I feel the United States needs to do from my perspective. Whatever you think about it, let me know in the comments. I'd love to respond. And also do join me at jeffrich.substack.com. Pick up as a paid subscriber my post-1945 World Guide, and follow my world history tour of world powers this year, where I'm looking at Russia, China, India, the United States, current focus, and the European Union.